What's up, Internet? So I'm getting ready to change out the fuel pump on the Cutlass, and I started thinking not everybody really understands how the mechanical fuel pump works on an engine. Most vehicles nowadays, well, pretty much all vehicles nowadays, have an electric fuel pump. An electric fuel pump can be very small. I have one right here. This is a really simple Mr. Gasket one. Um, As you can see, it's extremely compact. There's not a lot to it. You've got a positive, negative. Fuel gets sucked in and flows out. So the advantages of an electric fuel pump is it primes the engine. You get constant fuel flow no matter what RPM the engine's at. Disadvantage of the electric fuel pumps is they can be very finicky about how they're mounted. So if this is your fuel pump and this is your gas tank, you want it mounted below the bottom level of your gas tank. It's up like this, the full weight of the column of gas won't feed the pump properly. If you mount it in a different way like that, you can get air trapped in certain parts of the pump, which can strain it and cause it to work harder. So those are the advantages, disadvantages. Mechanical pumps are much more simple. They'll bolt to an engine on an older vehicle. They get run normally off the camshaft on a special Lobe, which I'll show you right over here on the bench. And they're extremely simple. There's very little that's fault with them. It's easy to change them out. They're very easy to get to. Whereas electric fuel pumps, they can be on the frame rail, but some of them are in the tank. And when it's an in-tank pump, you have to drop the fuel tank. If you're lucky enough to have a vehicle with an access panel, or you cut your own access panel, that's one way of doing it. But mechanical fuel pumps, like I said, extremely simple, very easy. Sometimes the engine starts a little bit harder because it takes a little bit for the pressure to get pulled up into the engine. But for the basics, I'm going to show you right over here on the bench a mechanical fuel pump and some of the stuff that goes into that. So here you can see is a mechanical fuel pump. This is the actuation lever, and then you got your inlets and outlets. This is a clockable pump, as in you take these off and you can spin it so the inlets and outlets are in a different position. The downside to this is it's a much bigger setup than what like a stock mechanical fuel pump would be. You can see the overall size difference between the two. How this one sits down further. This one just has the basic inlets and outlets that are set up from the factory. So both of them can work fairly good. A lot of people go with a higher performance pump just to put more fuel. You'll have an engine that has a brake specific fuel consumption, and you'll need more gallons per hour of fuel flow to feed that engine. So as you can see, like I said, this is the actuation arm, and that is actuated by a fuel pump push rod. Now this is true for a small block Chevy. Other engines like a Ford or the Oldsmobiles and stuff like that, this lever will actually be longer and go all the way up to the lobe on the camshaft. But a small block Chevy, you have this push rod that actually goes up into the engine. It works off of the camshaft, and then it pushes right here on this actuation lever. Now whenever you're changing out the fuel pump or you're putting a new one on, you always want to look at this rod. You want to make sure that these lobe ends haven't been worn out completely, because they can get a cup to them and they'll actually shorten the rod over time, so you won't get a full stroke on your fuel pump, so you won't get all the fuel that you need. Then also look at upgrading this. It's a very simple thing that people avoid or don't think about. ARP, I know, makes them, and it's just that's a hardened shaft that's supposed to work better. I've seen these fuel pump push rods bend just because you're putting more strain with a higher output pump, and you'll have a push rod that's 20, 30, 40 years old, 50 years old. They can stress, fatigue, bend over time. So they're really cheap. Go ahead and get them. Now talking about the camshaft, you can see here's a camshaft here. You got your intake exhaust lobes all right here, and right up here towards the front of the camshaft there's a second or another lobe that's a lot broader, and it doesn't have an aggressive peak on it. This is your fuel pump lobe. So your fuel pump push rod will ride right here on on the camshaft, so as it turns, it'll push it up, which turns it into a pumping action right here on your fuel pump. So it's a very simple system. There is a lot of mechanics to it as far as there's pumps, pieces, clearances. So you want to be careful, make sure that everything's working in concert, make sure you have good lubrication to everything. And be careful, like if you're installing this on a brand new engine, you want to make sure you put assembly lube on this to make sure that it doesn't destroy this fuel pump lobe on your camshaft or anything like that. And one thing to why these go bad, generally it's normally the gasket or something that goes bad inside these pumps and they'll start leaking fuel, or the diaphragm in here will get a puncture and then you'll actually leak fuel into your crankcase, and you'll go to drain your oil and it'll look like a milkshake because you have fuel and oil mixed together. On the stock ones, you can see that this doesn't bolt together. It's actually swedged together. It's got a crimp fitting and can leak out between there. So that's why you'd want to change it. And then also, if you are having a slower fuel flow problem, like on the particular engine in the Cutlass, right now it's only pumping out about 4 psi at idle out of the electric fuel pump that's in there, and probably it needs to be closer to 5.5 or sometimes up to 7 psi of fuel. So that's why I'm changing out to another pump. So I hope this kind of gave you some insight on what's going on with a mechanical fuel pump inside of an engine. And when I change this out, I'll try to do a video so you guys can see a quick tip and trick on how to get everything to line up with the fuel pump push rod and all that.